You're listening to the Power and Excellence podcast with Dr. John.
Hello and welcome. This is indeed the Power and Excellence podcast, and I am your host, Dr. John. Today we're talking about something that plagues, I think, all of us, or at least most of us, at some point or another. Today we're talking about procrastination. And I was going to do this podcast last week, but, I just never got around to it. So whether it's delaying a big project, or putting off a difficult conversation, or postponing simple tasks like laundry, procrastination can feel like a never-ending cycle. But why do we do it? Why do we procrastinate? Especially when we know that it's counterproductive. What's going on in our brains that makes us push things off until the last minute? Today, we'll take a deep dive into the psychology of procrastination, what it is, why do we do it, and how it can affect various aspects of our lives. And hang around, because at the end, we're going to explore some practical tips on how we can finally break the cycle of procrastination.
You're listening to the Power and Excellence podcast with Dr. John.
So what exactly is procrastination? On the surface, procrastination is simply the act of delaying or postponing something. But the psychology behind it is much more complex. Procrastination is essentially a self-regulation failure, where we opt for short-term relief over long-term goals, even when we know that it might harm us in the long run. And that's quite perverse. According to academic research by Dr. Piers Steele, who is a leading expert on procrastination, about 95% of people report procrastinating at least occasionally. And around 20% of us do it chronically to the point where it negatively impacts our lives. Procrastination isn't just about poor time management. It's much more closely related to emotional regulation. It's often driven by a desire to avoid negative emotions. So, for example, if a task makes you feel anxious, overwhelmed, or even bored, procrastination is the perfect solution because it provides immediate relief by pushing that task aside. However, this relief is temporary, and as we all know, the stress usually comes back bigger and stronger. So let's take a deeper look into the psychological mechanisms behind procrastination. Why do we keep delaying tasks even when we know that we have to face them eventually? It makes so much more sense to just get it out of the way, to do it, be done with it. But we don't do that. And there are several key psychological factors that contribute to this behavior. One of the primary reasons we procrastinate is a cognitive bias called temporal discounting. And this means that we tend to prioritize immediate rewards over future benefits. The task that you're procrastinating on may have a long-term payoff, like finishing a big project or even doing the laundry, but your brain focuses on the short-term discomfort that performing that task might bring. And because it's focusing on that short-term discomfort, the temptation and the reward of scrolling through social media or just watching one more episode on Netflix feels so much more rewarding in that moment, even if it delays something really important. Procrastination is closely tied to emotional regulation. When a task triggers negative emotions such as anxiety, boredom, or frustration, people procrastinate to avoid these feelings. Dr. Tim Pikyle, a leading researcher on procrastination, says it's not the task itself that we're avoiding, but it's the emotions associated with it. And this is because procrastination is also about a battle between two parts of your brain, the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex. The limbic system is responsible for our emotions and impulses, while the prefrontal cortex controls planning and decision-making. And when we procrastinate, the limbic system often overrides the prefrontal cortex, leading us to choose short-term comfort over long-term rewards. The third factor is present bias. And present bias is our tendency to overvalue immediate rewards at the expense of future ones. And this is why we often say, well, I'll feel more motivated tomorrow. I'll be more energized tomorrow. Let me do it tomorrow when I think I'm going to be more relaxed, more rested, only to find ourselves in the same situation the next day. And research by George Ainsley suggests that we overestimate how much better we'll feel in the future on a chronic basis. And this is what leads to chronic procrastination, because I always think I'm going to feel better tomorrow. I always think I'm going to feel more energized tomorrow. I always think I'm going to have more insight tomorrow. And when tomorrow comes, I feel exactly the same way as I did today. The fourth factor is perfectionism. And this can really contribute to procrastination. People with perfectionist tendencies often delay starting tasks because they fear the outcome won't meet their high standards. And the pressure to perform perfectly can make the task feel overwhelming. And this leads to avoidance because they're focusing on how much work, how much effort it's going to take. The stress and anxiety involved to achieve that perfection is so overwhelming that once again, the easiest, most rewarding thing to do is to avoid those feelings of stress and anxiety, and we avoid starting the task. But let's take a look briefly at how procrastination plays out in the real world. Sarah is a college student who struggles with procrastination on her term papers. Despite knowing that she needs several weeks to write a good paper, the kind of paper that she knows she wants to hand in, she often waits until the night before to actually get started. And she admits that the reason she delays is because she feels so overwhelmed by the enormity of the project and the worries that it won't meet her professor's expectations. And so she turns to distractions like binge watching, social media. These give her short-term relief from the anxiety, but the panic is always there. It's always somewhere in the background, in the back of her mind. And it really sets in the night before the deadline. So in her case, perfectionism and fear of failure are driving her procrastination. Now let's talk about Abdul. Abdul is a sales manager. He finds himself constantly putting off paperwork. He enjoys the thrill of closing deals and talking to clients. He's a sales guy. This is what he does. He loves it. But he struggles with the administrative tasks that follow. And every time he opens his inbox, he sees the mountain of paperwork and he feels overwhelmed and puts it off. And as deadlines approach, he feels more stressed and often ends up rushing through the paperwork. And his procrastination is driven by task aversion. He finds these tasks tedious and unenjoyable, so he delays them in favor of more stimulating activities, chasing more clients, getting more sales. These stories reflect the many ways that procrastination manifests itself in our lives. And whether it's Sarah's fear of failure or Abdul's aversion to boring tasks, procrastination often serves as a temporary escape from negative emotions. But let's talk about the consequences of procrastination. While it might offer some short-term relief, procrastination most definitely has long-term effects that can significantly impact both our productivity and our mental health. One of the most immediate consequences is heightened stress. The more we delay a task and the closer we get to the deadline, this increases our anxiety. And this can lead to a vicious cycle because we remember how anxious and scared we felt as that deadline approached the last time we found ourselves in this situation. And that means that the next time we are even more determined to avoid those feelings of stress and anxiety. And we avoid that task even more. Research shows that chronic procrastinators often produce lower quality work. The stress of last-minute cramming or rushing through projects leads to errors, sloppy work, missed details, and in Sarah's case, her term papers often lacked the depth that they could have if she had started those projects earlier. Quality of work, when we look back on something that we know we had time to do and we just didn't get started early enough, we look back and we think, well, it was okay, but I could have done better. And again, this leads us to feel anxious, it leads us to feel a lower self-worth, and maybe even feel a little bit disappointed in ourselves. These are all negative emotions that the next time around, we will do everything we can to avoid them, and we will procrastinate even more. Then there is the erosion of self-esteem. Over time, procrastination really hurts our emotional system. When we constantly fail to meet deadlines, we disappoint ourselves. When we fail to meet our own expectations, this can lead to feelings of incompetence and self-doubt, and in severe cases, can even contribute to depression. And if you've listened to our other podcast on learned helplessness, you'll recognize that procrastination erodes self-esteem to the point where we start to learn that this is just what I do. This is all I'm capable of. But this is made up. This is just a concept, a construct that we have created to fool ourselves and to give ourselves that wiggle room to procrastinate. Procrastination doesn't just affect our current tasks, though. It can cause us to miss out on future opportunities. When you delay action, you might miss deadlines. If you delay updating your resume or your CV, you might miss a deadline for a job application. If we're consistently meeting deadlines at work, we might not be in line for promotions, even though we have the mental aptitude, we have the physical ability to do things better. Our abilities don't come into it because we're procrastinating and we're sabotaging ourselves. So procrastination can really impact us for future opportunities as well. Let's take a very quick look at some of the research and theories that explain why procrastination is so common. Developed by Dr. Piers Steele, the temporal motivation theory explains procrastination in terms of how people value tasks over time. TMT suggests that people are more likely to procrastinate on tasks with distant deadlines because they place more value on the immediate gratification of time. And this theory helps explain why people start working as the deadline approaches, because at that point the task has a more immediate value. So the further in advance the task is, the lower the value. The more closely that deadline is approaching, the task has greater value. Then there's the procrastination equation. This is also by Steele, and it's a formula that predicts how likely somebody is to procrastinate based on 4 variables: expectancy, value, impulsiveness, and delay. If the expectancy of success or the value of the task is low, but impulsiveness is high, procrastination is more likely to occur. On the flip side, if we perceive that the task is very valuable and we believe that we can succeed, we're much less likely to procrastinate. And finally, there is the research by Dr. Tim Pikyle, emphasizing that procrastination is less about time management and more about emotional regulation. People procrastinate to avoid negative emotions associated with a task, but this avoidance only worsens their emotional state in the long run. And Pikyle argues that addressing the emotional root of procrastination, addressing the stress, the fear, the anxiety, can be key to overcoming procrastination. It's finally here! Hurrah! We've reached that part of the proceedings where we can talk about the practical steps that we can all take to overcome procrastination. And I've come up with 7 tasks, or 7 steps, 7 tips if you like, to help us overcome procrastination. One of the biggest reasons that we procrastinate is because things seem too big, too overwhelming. When a project feels enormous, it's easy to put it off. But the trick is to break it into smaller, bite-sized steps, and this is known as chunking. So our first tip is to break tasks into manageable pieces. Instead of thinking, I need to write an entire report, let's start with thinking, I'll just write the introduction. Instead of thinking, I have a 100,000-word thesis to write, let's just think, I'll write a paragraph. Once you finish that, you can move on to the next section. And by focusing on those smaller pieces, you build momentum and make the tasks less daunting. And research supports this method too. According to Tim Pikyle, chunking tasks into smaller parts reduces the overwhelming feeling and helps people to make progress quicker. Step 2. is to use the 2-minute rule. This simple rule can help you get started on just about anything. The idea here is to commit to working on a task for just 2 minutes. And you'll often find that once you start, it's easier to keep going. Tell yourself, I'll just work on this for 2 minutes. Come on, we can do anything for 2 minutes. Anybody can do anything for 2 minutes. So whether it's writing, cleaning, studying, whatever it is, the hardest part is often just getting started. And the 2-minute rule tricks your brain into action. Once you've started, you're much more likely to continue beyond the 2 minutes. And again, this tip is also grounded in psychology. This 2-minute rule tricks your brain and engages your brain's Zeigarnik effect, which makes us want to finish a task that we've already started. It's a clever way to bypass the mental resistance that often leads to procrastination. Well, third tip is setting a deadline. We all know the power of deadlines. But did you know that a self-imposed deadline is just as effective as those given by somebody else? Procrastination thrives when there's lack of structure. So giving yourself a clear, specific deadline helps you to stay accountable. Rather than telling yourself, I'll do this sometime this week. Be specific. Set yourself a deadline like, I'll finish this by Wednesday at 4 p.m. Having that clear target reduces the mental ambiguity that fuels procrastination. The week is long. Just telling yourself that you'll do it at some point this week is no good for anybody. Studies have shown that when we impose deadlines with specific times, we're more likely to meet them. Behavioral economists Dad Airley and Klaus Wartenbrock found that self-imposed deadlines improve task performance even if they aren't tied to external rewards. Tip 4 is to eliminate distractions. Another major cause of procrastination is the distraction, whether it's your phone, social media, noisy environments, whatever it is. If distractions are within reach, you'll always find a way to put your attention somewhere else. Before you begin working, set up your environment for focus. Set yourself up for success. Put your phone on Do Not Disturb or switch it off. Use apps like Freedom or Cold Turkey to block distracting websites. Create a workspace where you can focus. Research on distraction shows that it takes an average of 23 minutes to refocus after an interruption. By eliminating distractions from the start, you're much more likely to get into the flow and stay focused and stay productive. Tip 5 is to use rewards to stay motivated. Humans are wired to seek reward, and you can use this to your advantage when battling procrastination. Reward yourself for completing tasks. Break your tasks into smaller goals and reward yourself when you complete them. For example, after finishing a section on a project rather than the whole project, treat yourself to a break. Maybe a snack, a cup of coffee, cup of tea, or something enjoyable, but something brief and something short, right? Not treat yourself to go and watching a movie or watching another episode on Netflix. This strategy leverages the dopamine reward system in our brain, and according to neuroscientist Dr. Judson Brewer, rewarding yourself activates the brain's pleasure centers, making it more likely that you'll want to repeat that behavior in future, i.e., you will want to continue to succeed in completion of sections of your project so that you get that reward. Our final tip is to practice self-compassion. To be kind to yourself. When you catch yourself procrastinating, avoid harsh self-criticism. Instead, just acknowledge that, hey, it's a slip-up, and remind yourself that it's okay to struggle. Then refocus on your goals. A study by Dr. Fushia Siruwa found that people who practice self-compassion are less likely to procrastinate because they don't get stuck in that cycle of guilt and shame. And they're better able to move forward after a setback. Again, this is one of those emotions that if we keep beating ourselves up, if we keep engaging in guilt and shame, it's an emotion that we're going to want to avoid. So if we can avoid that, we're much less likely to procrastinate. So let's recap. Here are our 6 tips that we've covered to help overcome procrastination. Step 1, break tasks into smaller steps. Step 2, use the 2-minute rule. Step 3, set clear deadlines. Step 4, eliminate distractions. Step 5, reward yourself. And Step 6, practice self-compassion. Procrastination is something that we all deal with, but these strategies can help us to start taking control of our time and our productivity. Remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about making small, consistent changes. So thanks for joining me today. Thanks for tuning into this episode. If you found it useful, if it resonated with you, be sure to like and subscribe and share this episode with anybody that you think might find it useful. So until next time, take action and stay productive. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
You're listening to the Power and Excellence podcast with Dr. John.